I was at something called a church a couple of weeks back, and I was sharing on the poor, and for 4 sessions, which is the short version, and they had red lights which hurt my eyes, and just before the last session I asked them, would it be alright if we don't have the red lights, and what are they for? And they said, yeah, to make the speaker look good. And that's one expression of something that is terribly hard for me. For some peculiar reason, people think big meetings are going to be better than small ones. And I don't like them. I will suffer them sometimes, but I'm not remotely convinced that something called an anointed talk is going to help 5,000 people. Maybe one. And I have a personal deep discomfort with the paraphernalia of meetings. I hate platforms, I hate lights, hate microphones. I've been to some missionary meetings that talk about percentages or numbers, and how more and more people are, percentage-wise, are believing in Jesus. And it doesn't thrill me, because I always see it the other way round. The longer time goes on, the more people are dying. And more people are now dying than ever before. And there's a tension, I don't know whether you feel this, as to whether to say, Lord, come back quickly, or could you hold off for the sake of the lost? It is a fact that today in the world there are more people in slavery than there have ever been in the whole of history combined, and a large number of them are here. They got here in containers. There are something like 1 million women newly enslaved yearly, and the figures for the children are huge. Those are the ones who are actually child prostitutes. But imagine in this country, for I suppose we must start here, how many websites are for watching porn, and how many can watch children on there? And just think, who let their kids be filmed? Who let them? This is a wonderful and an awful time to be alive. And it is a fact that there are millions of people who cannot free themselves. There's a thousands in Sri Lanka, little boys, and they are sex slaves, little boys. And some of them have been allowed by the orphanages they come from. But they don't get the money. Just someone else does. As so often, if you're a slave. It happens to be also that most of the people who've never heard about Jesus are poor. Most of the people who've never heard about Jesus are destitute. That is a huge number in the Indian subcontinent. That is the area where most of the hungry are. And they never heard about Jesus. And they will die for eternity without him. It just happens to be that the greatest number who need to be saved are also physically poor, let alone those who are delinquently poor on drugs, or imagine having been a child soldier. I mean, imagine. This is not your choice. This is join or die. And when they join, some of them have to kill their parents. I don't know if you're in a fellowship or in a group that prays for one another when you have problems. How many years would you need to pray for that kid? And there are tens of thousands of them who, after starting killing their parents, have to go on killing others. So this is actually a desperate world. It's completely possible to reach the world. It couldn't not be. I mean, I don't think it's going to be more possible in 20 years than now. It's just, we haven't started, most of us. A few do, and they're much admired. It's not right. If we are supposed to go and reach the ends of the earth, it's possible before the ends of the earth perish. And therefore there has to be in us a quickening. Because God is not pleased when he sees the injustice on the earth. Sometimes I would call it inequality, but of course you can't quite compare. When I first went to Hong Kong and watched people who were making plastic goods, and the mother would spend the whole day doing that, and she got the equivalent of about one of your dollars. And then I would go, after having visited her and spent the day in the walled city, I would go and drink a cup of coffee, and it cost me a third of what she spent a whole day earning. And when you're new, you just can't quite work that out. You just can't quite reconcile it. In the end I could, because it really isn't a comparison. It isn't how much have they got and how much have I got. It's how do you use what you've got. This is what the Lord says. Psalm 82 verse 3. Defend the cause of the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the rights of the poor and the oppressed. Rescue the weak and needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. If you look psalm after psalm after psalm, And throughout Leviticus, Deuteronomy, particularly, you'll find, and God and Isaiah, God is continually expressing his heart for the poor. And particularly his heart for those who would have no other resource apart from him. Because in those days, there isn't a government resource. It's the people of God and God or nothing. There's not the government and the church. It was God. So God says he's particularly concerned about the widow and the orphan, because the widow would have no place, no identity, no defense, and no support, no providence, what do you call it, provision. My head's in a Chinese muddle. No provision without him. And then he goes on to say that's his heart, and he will defend the cause of the poor and the needy. And then he says this is how we are to express his heart. And in Jeremiah 22:16 it talks about a king who was well known, and it says he defended the cause of the poor and needy, and so all went well. Is that not what it means to know me? Declares the Lord. As if that were the way you would know if somebody knew the Lord. Not how many foundation courses they went to or Bible study classes they graduated. It's really what he is saying is, if you have known me, you couldn't help, could you? It's spilling over. Could you? If it doesn't spill over to the poor and the weak and the oppressed, you may not have known a God who loved them. That's why he says, if a man shuts his ears to the cry of the poor, he too will cry out and not be answered. I'll read that again. It's in Proverbs 21 verse 13. By the way, I do note, some of you may be able to remember all this. Others of you, in the future, whatever group you go to, you must take your Bibles and you must check out your preachers. You must not believe your preachers. You must get your stuff from the book. You must get your stuff from the book. Okay, here's what the book says. Proverbs 21:13. If a man shuts his ears to the cry of the poor, he too will cry out and not be answered. Now, what's this mean? This is my understanding. It's a little bit like if you do not forgive others, you will not be forgiven. It's a little bit like that. Now, what comes first? Well, actually, of course, God forgiving us comes first. When I was in distress, in mercy, he found me, and he forgave me my sins. Therefore, out of the abundance of the huge debt he has paid for me, of course I can forgive the little offense of my brother, or the rather big one, because comparatively with mine against God, it is small. And if you have been in distress and called out to the Lord, and He has heard you, you will be able to hear the cry of the poor. I used to live in a place called the Walled City, where at night, well, it probably happens here, except your houses are spaced, and some have fences round, but where we live, when children are being beaten up, or wives being beaten, you can hear it. And I wake up and think, where is the kid? Or where is the woman? In Chinese culture, they say, don't get involved. But in biblical culture, you must. If a man shuts his ears to the cry of the poor, he too will cry out and not be answered. So you must try and find where that poor person is. They might be being murdered. And would you not want somebody to rescue you when you cried? Would you not? And so he's saying here, do you believe in a God who hears your cry? If you don't hear the cry of the poor, you probably don't believe in a God who hears yours. So he doesn't. I was in Taiwan a few years ago, and I don't know completely what you talked about this morning, but I gather you began some discussions on perhaps what something called church might look like. But in Taiwan, actually it's probably the same here. It used to be, if you had a conference on how to multiply your cell groups, you'd get absolutely millions of people, because everybody wanted something big. And if they heard that this person in Singapore had a model that had grown to 30,000, they thought, if I can get this program, I too can have 30,000 people and multiply my cell groups every 6 months. I think that's the rule. And truly. And if you have a conference on the poor, of course, no one comes. And I was sharing with these Taiwan pastors that I said, this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a man who will love one poor man, whether that poor man says thank you or not. Let's suppose, and this has certainly happened amongst our people, let's suppose he sleeps in the street and he smells, and he may have some mental problems or drinking problems or something, and you visit him and you make friends with him, but he doesn't want to be friends and he swears at you, and you still go and you love him. And I said, I'm looking for somebody who will go on loving one poor man as if he's the only man on this earth, and love him whether he comes to Jesus or not. That's all. And this this Taiwan pastor came up to me at the end and he said, we have never heard this before. And I said, haven't you read the book? This is where I'm starting. I would like to ask you what you think about giving up our lives for one poor man? Or is there a more efficient ministry?